Los Angeles, January 1947. A city shimmering with neon, rain-soaked pavement, and the restless hum of a post-war boom. Its skyline was rising, its streets expanding, but so were its shadows. Hollywood promised fame, downtown offered opportunity, and thousands arrived each month, chasing a future brighter than the war they had just survived. Among them was a 22-year-old woman named Elizabeth Short. Her dreams were small, her struggles were quiet, and her presence was often misunderstood. But history would remember her by a name she never chose: the Black Dahlia. Her murder became one of America's most infamous unsolved cases. A crime so brutal, so calculated, and so taunting that it reshaped media, policing, and forensic investigation forever. Tonight, we revisit her story with modern analysis, realistic reconstruction, and a deep dive into the evidence that still echoes across Los Angeles. This is Global Echo Files. Elizabeth Short moved like a ghost through Los Angeles, not because she wanted to disappear, but because the city around her was too unstable, too crowded, and too transient to hold anyone for long. She rented rooms she couldn't afford, slept in apartments belonging to people she barely knew, spent evenings in cafes, hotel lobbies, and bus terminals, places where strangers gathered and where no one asked too many questions. Her final week on record is a maze of contradictions. Post-war Los Angeles was bursting at the seams. Soldiers had come home, factories were hiring, and the population had skyrocketed by nearly 1 million people in just 5 years. Housing was so scarce that people lived in trailers, garages, converted sheds, and overcrowded boarding homes. Elizabeth was one of them. This environment made tracking her movements nearly impossible. Witness: I saw her outside the Biltmore Hotel. She looked tired. She said she was waiting for someone, but she didn't say who. LAPD report. Multiple witnesses place Elizabeth Short at various downtown locations between January 9th and January 14th. Statements conflict regarding her clothing, companions, and direction of travel. Even now, with modern crime mapping and timeline reconstruction, the inconsistencies remain. Some said she was seen with a dark-haired man. Others claimed she was alone. Some said she was drunk. Others insisted she never touched alcohol. And because Elizabeth rarely stayed in one place more than a few nights, investigators were forced to chase her shadow instead of her steps. Before she became the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth was simply a young woman trying to find belonging. She grew up in Massachusetts, spent time in Miami, and moved between California cities, searching for stability. She wanted to act, or maybe just escape. Depends on who you ask. Some remembered her as shy, some as flirtatious. Some said she carried herself with the poise of a movie star. Others said she was fragile, even withdrawn. One thing is certain: her life was complicated, but not unusual for young women seeking opportunity in post-war Los Angeles. She wasn't wild, she wasn't reckless, she was just trying to get by. People forget that. Her final confirmed sighting was at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th. She left the lobby, and from that moment onward, her trail dissolves into contradiction. Why was she moving so frequently? Who was she waiting for? And why did so many witnesses claim to see her, but none could place her precisely? To understand Elizabeth's final days, you have to understand the instability of Los Angeles itself, a city overflowing with strangers, temporary lodgings, and people reinventing themselves every week. Her life became a script written by unreliable narrators, and in that uncertainty, her killer found the perfect cover. January 15, 1947, a cold Wednesday morning. Leimert Park was quiet. Rows of modest houses, trimmed lawns, and the routine of everyday life. At approximately 10:30 a.m., a local mother, pushing her baby stroller, noticed something lying near the sidewalk in a vacant lot. At first, she thought it was a mannequin, something left behind by a window dresser or discarded from a store display. But as she got closer, the truth emerged with horrifying clarity. A steady, shaken voice. Woman. It looked like a doll, but the color was wrong. There was no clothing. And then I realized it wasn't a doll at all. The body was pale, too pale, completely drained of blood. Elizabeth Short had been severed at the waist, cleanly, surgically, and posed with deliberate intent. Her arms were raised above her head, her legs positioned apart, her face mutilated. This wasn't just a killing, it was a message, and whoever had done it wanted the world to see. When modern forensic experts reconstructed the scene using photographs, witness statements, and preserved reports, several consistencies emerged. There was no blood at the scene, meaning she had been killed elsewhere, cleaned, and transported. The cuts were precise. No jagged hesitation marks, no amateur mistakes. The staging was intentional, not rushed, not panicked, controlled. Forensic analyst. The bisection was performed through the lumbar spine. This requires controlled force and anatomical understanding. The absence of blood indicates post-mortem handling. The body was posed, not simply dumped. For LAPD, this was unlike anything they had seen. Los Angeles had experienced brutal crimes before, but nothing with this level of planning, execution, and theatrical precision. The killer didn't act out of rage. This wasn't impulsive. There was no panic. This was someone who prepared, someone who had time, privacy, knowledge, and confidence. Within minutes of police arrival, the situation deteriorated. In 1947, crime scene protocol was primitive. Curious neighbors wandered close, stepping onto the lot. Reporters arrived within minutes, some even before homicide detectives. Cars pulled over. People stared. Photographers snapped pictures from nearly every angle. Evidence was destroyed before it could even be identified. Officer, we couldn't hold the crowd back. Everyone wanted to see the body. People were walking all over the place. We lost control of the scene in under 10 minutes. The investigation was already off to a disastrous start, and what happened next would only make it worse, because by the next morning, the media would explode, and Elizabeth Short's name, her real name, would be replaced forever by something else. A headline, a myth, a brand, the Black Dahlia. The morning papers didn't just report the story, they weaponized it. Reporters crowded the newsroom floors, shouting over each other, racing to publish anything that would sell. Facts were stretched. Rumors became headlines. Private letters were printed as if they were public property. And Elizabeth Short, who never once called herself glamorous, mysterious, or dangerous, was suddenly portrayed as all three. She became a symbol the city could exploit. The Black Dahlia, a name invented to sell newspapers, to romanticize tragedy, to turn a victim into a spectacle. The media didn't just cover the crime, they helped shape the investigation, bending public opinion with every new edition. Articles described her as an actress, even though she had never acted. They painted her as a femme fatale, even though her closest friends described her as gentle. They speculated about secret lives, dangerous lovers, shadowy dealings, stories designed not to inform, but to intrigue. The truth was quieter, but quiet didn't sell. The pressure on the LAPD grew by the hour. Politicians demanded results. Newspapers mocked delays. Tips flooded in, most false, some malicious, all distracting. The investigation began to fracture. Detectives worked long hours, chasing leads that collapsed as soon as they were written down. Witnesses contradicted each other. Suspects appeared and vanished. The case file thickened, while clarity dissolved. Inside the department, frustration boiled. One officer described the early investigation as trying to build a house during an earthquake. The ground kept moving. Nothing held still long enough to understand. Leads piled up by the hundreds. Neighbors claimed to have seen suspicious cars. Hotel clerks insisted they recognized Elizabeth. Strangers swore they overheard confessions in bars and cafes. Each tip meant more hours lost. Each headline meant more pressure, and somewhere beneath all of it, the real killer watched silently as the investigation spun further away from the truth. LAPD searched rooming houses, questioned ex-boyfriends, interviewed bartenders, taxi drivers, soldiers, and drifters. But the city was too big, too crowded, too full of faces that came and went without leaving a trace. Evidence handling was sloppy. Key items went missing. Crime scene contamination made certain analyses impossible. Some detectives believed the killer had medical training. Others thought he was a violent drifter. Some insisted he was a local man, hiding in plain sight. No one could agree, and as disagreement grew, so did the chaos. For For weeks, the investigation moved like a machine with broken gears, making noise, consuming energy, but going nowhere meaningful. Then, something unexpected arrived. A letter, cut out words, pasted onto paper. A message addressed directly to the press. "I will give up in Dahlia killing." Inside the envelope were items belonging to Elizabeth Short, carefully cleaned with gasoline. It wasn't a confession. It was a performance, a taunt, a demonstration of control. The killer wasn't just watching the investigation. He was participating in it, feeding it, shaping it, manipulating the story as it unfolded. Gasoline washing removed fingerprints. The typography suggested someone meticulous, patient, deliberate, someone who enjoyed the game as much as the violence. Investigators examined the letter again and again, searching for hidden meaning, psychological clues, patterns, but the sender left only what he wanted them to see, and nothing more. Dozens of people came forward claiming responsibility. Most were dismissed instantly. Some were seeking attention. Others were mentally unstable. A few were trying to protect someone else. Confessions piled up, each more outrageous than the last, drowning out legitimate leads. Among the real suspects, one stood out, a man with surgical skill, a history of disturbing behavior, a personality shaped by arrogance and secrecy, a man connected to powerful circles, someone who knew how to stay untouchable. But even he couldn't be proven guilty. Evidence was circumstantial. Witness accounts were unreliable. Old reports conflicted with new ones, and the LAPD, already overwhelmed, struggled to build a coherent timeline. The deeper investigators looked, the darker the possibilities became. Connections to military surgeons, links to other unsolved murders, threads stretching across cities, states, and years. The Black Dahlia case wasn't simply a murder. It was part of something wider, a pattern of calculated violence, hidden beneath the noise of post-war America. Forensic experts revisiting the case decades later noted details that earlier investigators missed. The precision of the cuts suggested confidence, yes, but not necessarily a licensed doctor. Butchery workers, military medics, morticians, all had the skill required. The absence of hesitation wounds indicated emotional detachment, not rage, not panic, control. The staging suggested ritual, maybe symbolic, maybe personal, but intentional. Whoever did this wanted the body found, and wanted it found exactly the way it was left. Elizabeth Short's story became more than a case file. It became a cultural phenomenon, a noir legend, a symbol of Hollywood's dark undercurrents and society's obsession with violent mystery. Movies, books, articles, theories. Everyone had a version of the Dahlia story. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory. But the truth stayed buried beneath decades of speculation. And the woman at the center of it all, Elizabeth, was often lost beneath the mythology built around her name. Her life mattered long before her death. Her story deserved more than sensational headlines and endless speculation. And yet, even now, the unanswered questions continue to echo through Los Angeles. Who killed her? Why? And how did they disappear so completely, leaving behind a case no one has ever solved? Those answers lie somewhere in the shadows, in the contradictions, the mistakes, the forgotten testimony, the evidence lost to time. But the echoes remain, whispering through history, refusing to fade. The deeper investigators dug, the more the case pulled them into a labyrinth of dead ends and half-truths. Every promising lead dissolved the moment they tried to pin it down. Every suspect looked guilty until evidence revealed they weren't. It became a case defined by contradictions, each one pushing the truth further into the dark. Over 50 people would eventually confess to the murder. Some walked into police stations calmly, claiming responsibility without emotion. Others showed up drunk, angry, desperate for attention. A few confessed simply because they wanted a bed, food, or medical care. One man recited details he couldn't possibly have known. Another claimed he wrote the taunting letters, but couldn't explain why the handwriting didn't match. A woman insisted she dreamed the murder, and believed her dream was real. Each confession consumed hours. Each false lead drained energy. Each distraction pulled investigators further from the person who mattered most, the real killer. But beneath the noise, One name surfaced repeatedly, a man with intelligence, training, and a reputation for cruelty behind closed doors. A man who lived near the crime scene, owned surgical tools, and had a complicated, disturbing history. He wasn't the only suspect, but he was the one who caused investigators to pause, to wonder if the truth had been sitting in front of them all along. Still, suspicion wasn't proof, and the case needed proof. While detectives wrestled with suspects, forensic science was trying to interpret what the body had already revealed. Experts studying the photographs, decades later, identified patterns earlier investigators didn't have the tools to see. The precision suggested not improvisation, but rehearsed skill. The methodical separation of the body mirrored documented procedures used in medical settings, particularly in the 1930s and 40s. The drainage of blood indicated preparation and time. The positioning of the limbs suggested a message, though what that message meant remains lost to interpretation. Some experts believed the killer had personal motivation. Others argued it was ritualistic. A few believed the staging was meant to mislead, to push investigators toward a false psychological profile. Every theory seemed possible. None could be proven. Meanwhile, the city became consumed by fear. Women avoided walking alone. Parents kept children indoors. Taxi drivers refused late-night fares, unless paid up front. Hollywood studios whispered about banning actresses from living alone. Boarding houses posted warnings. Nightclubs doubled security. People studied the faces of strangers more carefully. The Black Dahlia wasn't just a murder, it was a wound, one that split the city open and exposed its darkest anxieties. And yet, even in fear, fascination grew. Photographs of Elizabeth Short circulated everywhere. Newspapers, magazines, police reports, street posters, images of her in fashionable dresses, smiling softly, looking hopeful, were plastered beside sensationalist headlines. The public became obsessed, treating her tragedy as if it were entertainment. Some read every article as if the next sentence might reveal the killer's identity. Others speculated recklessly, accusing neighbors, ex-lovers, strangers. Rumors spread faster than evidence. Every night, radio hosts retold the story. Every morning, newspapers updated it with new speculation, new theories, new invented details. A crime had become a commodity, and as the story grew larger than the investigation, the real Elizabeth quietly slipped away behind the mythology built around her. She had become an icon of tragedy, a face without a voice, a woman without context, a victim buried beneath her own legend. But her family remembered her differently. They remembered a daughter who wrote long letters home, a young woman who loved movies, who dreamed of being in them but never demanded the spotlight, someone who laughed easily, trusted quickly, and hoped fiercely, perhaps too fiercely. They didn't see the Black Dahlia, they saw Elizabeth, a sister, a daughter, a person. But the country didn't want a person. It wanted a mystery wrapped in beauty and horror. Detectives fought to keep the truth grounded, but the case was slipping out of their hands and into the public's imagination. Still, they worked. Hour after hour, lead after lead, interrogation after interrogation. One detective described the feeling as running toward a finish line that kept moving. Another said, "The harder we pulled, the tighter the knot became." The case became so massive that rooms inside LAPD headquarters had to be dedicated solely to Dahlia files. Boxes stacked high, reports scattered across long tables, maps pinned to walls with strings connecting sightings, suspects, and locations. It looked organized from the outside, but inside, it was chaos. Witnesses lied to feel important. Some lied to protect someone. Some lied just because reporters paid them for their stories. Names were added to lists, scratched off, then added again. With every passing week, the truth grew more distant. Investigators began to fear something devastating, that the case might never be solved. Months passed, leads dried up, public attention drifted to newer headlines. Even the newspapers that once sensationalized the story moved on. But the echoes of the Dahlia case never disappeared. They lingered in police archives, in forensic studies, in whispered theories passed between detectives long after retirement, in academic papers trying to make sense of old reports. and in the cultural memory of a city that still carries the shadow of that winter morning. The murder had changed Los Angeles, and it had changed the way America saw violence, women, and media. Yet one thing remained untouched by time: the truth, still buried, still silent, still waiting. The investigation entered a new phase, when detectives expanded their search beyond Los Angeles. They began looking into medical schools, military hospitals, and air bases, anywhere someone with anatomical knowledge might have worked. If the killer understood how to separate the body cleanly, he had either practiced it or been trained. That meant records, thousands of them. Lists of former surgeons, medical students who left programs abruptly, military doctors discharged under unusual circumstances. Most were eliminated quickly, but some names stayed on the board longer than others. One belonged to a military surgeon who had lived only miles from where the body was found. Another belonged to a mortician's assistant with a history of violence. There were whispers about a traveling butcher who moved frequently and worked alone. A doctor with a criminal record, a drifter whose girlfriend vanished under suspicious circumstances. Each of them seemed plausible. None of them could be proven. Detectives followed trails that stretched from California to Chicago, from Arizona to New York. They compared the Dahlia case to other unsolved murders. Women found mutilated, posed, desecrated. The comparisons were chilling, but never perfect. Nothing connected with absolute certainty. One set of killings, however, stood out: the Cleveland torso murders of the 1930s. Victims dismembered with precision, bodies staged or dumped. A killer who taunted investigators. Some believed the same person could have been responsible. Others argued that pattern killers sometimes mirrored each other without ever crossing paths. The truth was buried in what couldn't be proven. Meanwhile, psychological specialists began to analyze the killer's behavior. Their profiles described someone who planned meticulously, someone who enjoyed control, someone who wanted the discovery to feel theatrical, a killer who viewed the body not as evidence, but as a message. They believed he lived alone, that he had transportation, that he was intelligent enough to evade detection, yet arrogant enough to insert himself into the narrative. Someone who might have watched the investigation unfold with satisfaction. But psychological profiles could only go so far. They were theories, not answers. As the months passed, detectives found themselves returning to one particularly troubling suspect, someone who had left behind clues, not in evidence, but in behavior. A man known for his cruelty, a man rumored to have harmed women before, a man who lived in a home equipped with secret rooms and hidden spaces, a man whose own family members whispered about what they believed he had done. He denied everything, and without undeniable evidence, the case remained stalled. The frustration inside LAPD headquarters was palpable. Officers argued, captains disagreed. Some believed the killer was still in the city, others believed he had fled the moment the body was found. No one could say for certain. Detectives began revisiting earlier statements, searching for overlooked details. They retraced Elizabeth's last known movements: the Biltmore Hotel, the streets of downtown Los Angeles, the crowded districts she wandered through. Every step she took seemed to dissolve into conflicting memory. Some claimed she left with a man. Others insisted she walked away alone. A few described her as distressed. Others remembered her as calm. No single narrative could be trusted, because in a city overflowing with people, dozens of strangers believed they had seen her, whether they actually had or not. Several witnesses provided descriptions of a dark sedan seen in Leimert Park days before the body was discovered. Investigators examined the reports, but found no connection strong enough to pursue. Cars came and went constantly in that neighborhood. Nothing stood out. Another lead suggested Elizabeth had been seen in a nightclub with a man whose face no one could clearly recall. By the time detectives tracked him down, he had already left the state. Even her closest acquaintances couldn't offer clarity. Some claimed she was hopeful about future plans. Others believed she was struggling. Her life, like the case, was full of fragments that never fit into one complete story. And then, silence. The leads thinned. The calls stopped. The crowds faded. The newspapers found new stories. But inside the investigation rooms, the evidence remained scattered across tables, photos, maps, letters, reports, fingerprints, dead ends. A reminder that the case wasn't cold, out of neglect, but out of impossibility. For detectives, the most painful truth emerged slowly. The killer might have been someone the city would never suspect, someone who had already blended back into normal life, someone who smiled at neighbors, maintained a career, and lived without fear of discovery. Or worse, someone who left Los Angeles the moment their work was done, disappearing into another city, starting over as if nothing had happened. Forensic experts, re-examining the case decades later, reached similar conclusions. They believed the killer acted with familiarity with the area, with the body, with how long decomposition would take in January temperatures, familiarity with police response times. This wasn't random, it was calculated. The killer knew where to leave the body, so it would be found quickly. They knew how to avoid leaving blood or trace evidence. They knew how to stage it in a way that would shock the public and overwhelm investigators. It was a performance crafted with precision, and performances like that are rarely a first attempt. The idea that Elizabeth's killer might have harmed before or after haunts every expert who has studied the case. Patterns don't emerge in isolation. Staging doesn't appear suddenly. Techniques aren't perfected in a single night. But without physical evidence from earlier or later crimes, the theory sits in purgatory. Possible, even likely, but unprovable. As years turned to decades, the Black Dahlia case became more than a file. It became a legend, a story retold in whispers, documentaries, books, late-night conversations, a puzzle that refuses to be solved. Yet beneath the legend lies something more important, the story of a young woman whose life was far more than the tragedy that ended it. Elizabeth wasn't the mythical figure newspapers created. She wasn't the symbol of Hollywood darkness that storytellers imagined. She wasn't the glamorous mystery the media portrayed. She was someone searching for stability, for meaning, for a place to belong in a vast, restless city. The tragedy wasn't just in how she died. It was in how her identity was taken from her, reshaped by strangers and consumed by a public eager for sensation. And though the case remains unsolved, one truth resonates through time. Elizabeth Short deserved better. A better investigation, a better portrayal, a better memory than the one she was given. But history has a way of waiting, and sometimes answers reveal themselves slowly, long after the world stops looking. Whispers about new evidence surfaced occasionally, but most led nowhere. Over time, investigators learned to temper their expectations. Every promising lead had a way of crumbling when examined closely. Even the most compelling suspects eventually slipped through their fingers. Still, one name lingered, floating like a shadow over the case. A man whose life, when examined closely, seemed to intersect with violence far too often. A man whose behavior oscillated between brilliance and cruelty. A man who possessed the exact knowledge needed to commit the crime and vanish without consequence. Those who knew him described him with unease. Some spoke of his intelligence, sharp, almost frighteningly so. Others whispered about his volatility, his arrogance, his disregard for those around him. A few mentioned strange conversations that now, in hindsight, felt like warnings. But unless he confessed, or someone close to him spoke out, the truth remained locked away. Detectives revisited his home years later, an unsettling structure filled with hidden corridors and concealed spaces. It was the kind of place where secrets lived comfortably. Walls felt too thick, rooms too quiet, and everything seemed built with intentional privacy. Some believed the house itself was a clue. Others dismissed the idea as hindsight bias, but no one could ignore the chill that crawled up their spine while walking through it. Still, suspicion is not evidence, and evidence is what the case needed most. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's story continued to be reshaped by the world outside the investigation. As films and novels emerged, each one took further liberties, painting her not as a real person, but as a symbol of Hollywood's dark glamour. The truth became buried under layers of imagination, a myth constructed from tragedy. Her family tried to correct the narrative, occasionally, but the world preferred the more sensational version. Stories of mysterious lovers, secret lives, dangerous encounters, all fiction, all designed to captivate audiences hungry for drama. But in reality, Elizabeth wasn't a femme fatale. She wasn't living a double life. She wasn't navigating criminal circles or Hollywood elites. She was simply trying to survive in a city that embraced dreamers but abandoned them just as quickly. The tragedy of her life wasn't in the darkness people believed she inhabited, but in the vulnerability she carried. The vulnerability of someone searching for stability in a world that offered her none. As time passed, new detectives inherited the case. Some believed they could solve it with fresh eyes. Others approached cautiously, knowing how deeply the investigation had already failed. Every officer who opened the Dahlia file felt the weight of its history. The yellowing pages, the grainy photographs, the endless lists of suspects, the countless dead ends. One detective admitted privately that reading the entire file was like watching a storm hit the same place over and over, violent, chaotic, and impossible to predict. Another called it a maze with no exit. Yet the case remained open because closing it felt like surrender, and surrendering meant accepting that a killer had outsmarted an entire city. As forensic science evolved, experts revisited old evidence with new techniques. DNA testing, digital analysis, advanced profiling, each innovation offered hope. But the passage of time had eroded the chances of a breakthrough. Physical evidence degraded, witnesses passed away. Details became distorted by memory. Records were lost, damaged, or incomplete. Some items that might have held answers disappeared entirely. Still, a few forensic conclusions held firm. The killer had worked in a controlled environment, somewhere private, isolated, and equipped for the kind of careful preparation the crime required. A residential garage, a basement, a workshop, a medical space, somewhere the killer could take hours without interruption. The transportation of the body suggested a vehicle with space, likely someone who lived alone or had an explanation for being out late without question. Someone who could return to normal life the next day, unaffected. The psychological profile painted the picture of a person who viewed the crime as an expression of power, not passion. A person who understood how to manipulate public reaction. Someone who wanted to create fear, confusion, and fascination. People often imagine killers as wild, disheveled figures, but the most dangerous ones blend in. They hold conversations, they attend dinners, they nod politely at neighbors, they live in plain sight. Elizabeth never saw the danger approaching, or perhaps she did, but too late. The city had changed by the time investigators realized how vast the shadow behind the crime truly was. Los Angeles grew noisier, busier, more crowded. New tragedies replaced old ones. Streets that were once quiet filled with traffic. Neighborhoods transformed. Landmarks vanished. And yet the spot where Elizabeth was found remains one of the most haunting in the city's history. Not because of what happened there, but because of how little the scene was able to reveal. Researchers who visited the location years later described the odd disconnect between what they saw and what they knew. A quiet patch of land, ordinary in every way, once witnessed something extraordinary in its brutality. But nature has a way of softening the past. Grass grows, houses rise, people forget. Only the memory of the case lingers. Tourists sometimes visit the location, unaware of the lives disrupted by the investigation or the scars left on the city. They take pictures, point at maps, mention the case in passing. For them, it's a moment in history. For the people who lived through the investigation, it was a wound. The detectives who assigned themselves to the case, long after its peak, felt a personal responsibility to Elizabeth. They read every detail, studied every photograph, memorized every name. Some worked quietly, some became obsessed. One detective spent years building a private theory he never published, fearing it would be dismissed. Each investigator brought their own perspective, their own hope that they might uncover the one missing piece the earlier teams had overlooked. And yet, all reached the same painful conclusion. Nothing short of a confession or a miracle would reveal the full truth. But confessions rarely come from the grave, and miracles belong in stories, not case files. Still, the Dahlia murder refuses to fade. Not because of the brutality alone, but because of the unanswered questions. Every unsolved mystery contains a door left open, and the Black Dahlia case contains many. A killer unaccounted for, a victim misrepresented, A city transformed by fear, a story told too many times, yet never completely understood. And somewhere between the facts and the myth lies the truth. A truth waiting, buried beneath decades of speculation, rumors, and forgotten evidence. A truth that remains just out of reach. Despite the passage of time, new theories continued to emerge. Some built on research, others on imagination. Amateur investigators, authors, journalists, filmmakers, and even former detectives, each constructed their own version of the truth. Some theories were careful and grounded, others spiraled into sensationalism. A few pointed to organized crime. Some accused Hollywood insiders, others blamed strangers passing through the city. There were claims of secret affairs, hidden alliances, coded messages. Most of it was noise drowning the few signals that might have mattered. What made the case so difficult wasn't just the brutality of the crime, it was the emptiness around it. No clear timeline, no reliable final witness, no confirmed companion, no confession, no undeniable physical evidence. The crime felt as if it had been carved out of the city itself, then left behind with precision, so that nothing essential pointed back to the person who committed it. Some investigators began to suspect the killer understood policing. Others believed he studied anatomy. A few believed he had killed before, and almost all of them believed he was watching the investigation unfold. The letters sent to the newspaper suggested a desire for attention, a need for recognition. But the fact that the killer never continued the correspondence implied something else: caution. The killer seemed to know exactly how much to say and when to disappear. The story of the Black Dahlia grew so massive, so culturally embedded, that truth and myth fused into something inseparable. Old newspapers blurred with Hollywood scripts, real testimony mixed with invented detail. Every few years, someone claimed to have cracked the case, only for their theory to dissolve under scrutiny. Yet the fascination never faded. Tour guides mentioned the case in hushed tones. Writers described Elizabeth with poetic exaggeration. Filmmakers recreated scenes with dramatic flair. People around the world continued to whisper her name. But the most tragic part of the story wasn't the murder itself. It was how many people forgot who Elizabeth truly was. Beneath the legend was a young woman who carried photographs of her family in her purse, who wrote letters filled with hope despite her struggles, who wanted a life that felt bigger, safer, brighter than the one she had, who dreamed of belonging. Her life was overshadowed by her death, her identity consumed by a nickname she never chose, her story distorted into something thrilling rather than something human. If there is any lesson hidden inside the Black Dahlia case, it is this: the world often remembers tragedies more vividly than the people who endure them. For decades, newly assigned detectives returned to the case, each hoping to be the one who finally untangled it. They brought modern tools, computers, forensic reconstruction, digital indexing, fresh perspectives. They revisited old interviews, re-examined forgotten notes, compared the Dahlia case to other unsolved murders. Some believed they came close, others admitted they didn't move the case forward at all. One detective said, "Everything we learn only opens more questions." Cold cases are like that. They age, but they never sleep. They draw in anyone willing to chase a truth that may never reveal itself. And the Black Dahlia case remains one of the coldest, yet hottest, in American history. In recent years, there has been renewed interest from independent researchers who believe modern DNA techniques might one day identify a match from preserved evidence. It's a faint hope, but not impossible. Technology continues to advance. Samples once thought useless can now provide answers. Even degraded material has the potential to reveal hidden markers. But hope is not evidence, and evidence is what this case has lacked from the very beginning. Still, the idea lingers that one day someone might uncover the final missing piece: a forgotten file, a misplaced photograph, a confession buried in an attic, a DNA profile waiting for the right comparison, a discovery that finally brings closure to a story that has haunted Los Angeles for nearly 8 decades. Until then, the Black Dahlia remains an echo, a whisper that travels through time, haunting the city that swallowed the truth along with its shadows. Every year, small groups still gather to honor Elizabeth Short's memory. They speak quietly, acknowledging not the legend, but the woman. They stand together not to sensationalize her death, but to restore the dignity that was stripped away by headlines and curiosity. It is in those moments that Elizabeth feels real again. Not a myth, not a mystery, not a symbol, but a person whose life mattered. Los Angeles has changed dramatically since 1947. The neon signs have dimmed, the streetcars are gone, the neighborhoods have transformed. But the story of Elizabeth Short endures, living in the places where memory refuses to fade. A vacant lot in Leimert Park, a hotel lobby downtown, a city searching for answers it may never find. Her case is more than a crime. It is a reflection of a city navigating its own identity, its dreams, its darkness, its failures, its fascination with the extraordinary. And somewhere in the vast history of Los Angeles, the truth still exists, unseen, unspoken, waiting until the day it finally comes to light. One thing will always remain certain. Elizabeth Short was not defined by the name given to her. She was not defined by the brutality of her final moments. She was not defined by the endless speculation that followed. She was a young woman searching for something better and deserving of something far kinder than the world gave her. And though the case remains unsolved, the echo of her story continues to move through time, reminding us that behind every headline is a human life, fragile and irreplaceable. This is her story. This is her truth, as close as we may ever come to understanding it. And this is the echo she leaves behind.